Welcome to the Manders Mindset Podcast. Here you'll find both monologue and interviews of entrepreneurs, coaches, healers, and a variety of other people, where your host Amanda Russo will discuss her own mindset and perspective, and her guest mindset and perspective on the world around us. Manders and her guests will help explain to you how shifting your mindset will shift your life.
Welcome to Manders Mindset, where we explore the power of shifting your mindset to shift your life. I am so excited to be here with today's guest, Lindsay Ford. Lindsay helps women shed their limiting beliefs, societal expectations, fears, and thought patterns that have been holding them back so they can fully trust their intuition and courageously follow their dreams. She also hosts the podcast Break Free with Lindsay. Thank you for joining me.
I am so excited for this conversation, Amanda.
So that's an awesome bio, but who would you say Lindsay is at the core?
Oh my goodness. Lindsay is, I would say, you know what? I feel like I've shifted who I am at the core, or maybe I've just peeled back the layers of all of what you just said, those fears, those limiting beliefs. I feel more and more in tune with myself, because how I would describe myself now is how I would not have described myself a few years ago. I feel very happy, fulfilled. I love spontaneity and adventures and travel, and I love being a mother and raising kids to think differently. I love living off script and not following sort of the norms. And that's very different from how I was living a few years ago.
Can you take us down memory lane a little bit? Tell us about your childhood, upbringing, family dynamic, however deep you want to go with that.
My childhood was really, I grew up with my parents were together, stable sort of nuclear family. Probably one of the biggest defining things in my childhood was actually just doing competitive gymnastics for a number of years, because that was very time consuming, very structured, very disciplined, intense. I didn't have a lot of spare time. It was work, constantly work, not a lot of downtime. And I feel like that really shaped who I was to the core. And I know a lot of people think sports is great for kids, and because it builds discipline, teamwork, all of that fun stuff. But for me, and I loved it at the time, so I wasn't doing it against my will or anything, but I can see how that really shaped me in terms of not being able to relax, people pleasing in a sense, aiming for success, going for success. And I'll say doing it at all costs. I could say my physical body. I remember in my 20s, if I sprained my ankle, I would give it a rest for about a week. And if it wasn't healed, I would just jump on it. I'd be like, okay, I'm done waiting for you. So I learned to sort of push my body and push myself past where was maybe healthy, and just striving for success, striving for perfection in a lot of ways. When I think back to flipping through the air, it was always like, okay, you're never perfect. You have to, maybe you flexed your foot like mid flip or something like that. Or if you fell down, you still had to get up and smile for the judges. I feel like there's just so much of that experience that then led to who I was in adulthood in terms of chasing success, performing for others, not being able to sit still, not being able to play with my kids, really being stressed out almost when my kids wanted to sit with me, because I almost felt like a waste of time because it was slow and it wasn't quote unquote productive. And so that experience, I would say, really shaped me until probably well into my 30s, when I really started unraveling the stories and the beliefs and the fears and the patterns. And probably that started, I would say, around the time I turned 30. So that unraveling has happened over the last decade or so.
And how old were you when you did competitive gymnastics?
I actually started quite late. I started like the competitive stream around age 9, and I only did it till I was about 12. So about three-ish years. And, every day after school, it was 4 hours of training. So I was at like 20 to 24 hours a week by the time I quit at age 12, which, I have a 10-year-old daughter now, and that just seems insane to me.
Yeah, that's a huge commitment. You're not even talking schoolwork or homework, anything else.
Yeah, there was nothing else. I remember wanting to go out with friends on like up to a birthday party on Friday night or a hockey game. And my parents were like, no, you can't go. And I was like, why? They're like, you know what? Like you do gymnastics. And I'm like, that's not fair. None of your other friends do gymnastics. Like you have this commitment. And of course, they were paying like probably an insane amount of money for me to train that much. But that was my life. And I had a circle of friends at gymnastics, but I never went out with my school friends because there was just no time.
Okay. And now after gymnastics, did you get into some other type of activity?
So I just did some sports throughout high school, nothing intense, nothing super competitive. I tried a bunch of different sports. Probably the most serious thing I got into was badminton, but I wasn't super competitive. I wasn't doing anything really outside of school. I was just trying to find what I liked, and I tried a lot of different things. And at that point, through my teenage years, I started to have some, I'll say, health challenges. It was never identified what was going on in me until probably my mid-20s, but I used to get something called exertion headaches. So any sort of like cardio would leave me with a headache. So sports and exercise kind of took on a different role for me through high school and my 20s, and then healing from that. And then I've just had such an interesting relationship with.
And now you said exertion headaches.
Mhm.
Can you explain that?
Yeah, sure. I've heard them called exertion headaches. I've heard them called exercise headaches. So basically, what happens is that whenever you exert yourself, so usually in the form of cardio, I would get a headache, and it would start in the back of my neck and creep up all the way towards like the back of my head to the front of my head. And it was anything from, playing a soccer game to mowing the lawn sometimes, or just walking, going for like a 2-hour walk in the heat would give it to me. So, you know what, there was a period there's probably a 15-year period where I was just sort of like mad at my body. I wanted to exercise. I was consistently exercising, but I was in pain and nothing was really identified. I wasn't told that was a thing all through my teenage years. It started around like age 14. And it wasn't until my mid-20s when the doctor finally was just like, oh, you have exertion headaches. Here, take some prescription pills. And then it changed to just Advil before you exercise, and that would stop it. So at one point, I was exercising 4 or 5 times a week. I was taking Advil 4 or 5 times a week, which I didn't really want to do, but it was the only way I could exercise without pain. And then that came with some other consequences where, I would twist my ankle partway through a soccer game and then not realize it. Like, I was on painkillers. So I wouldn't realize until after. And I'm like, why is my ankle hurting? And then I started to shift my mindset actually around those headaches and was able to completely get rid of them when I was told by the doctors they didn't know what caused it. And you know what? That's something that you would just have to live with for the rest of your life.
So now, how did you start to shift your mindset around that?
So one of the things that being on like the Advil helps with is I could start to identify the early symptoms of it. So the first time I took that painkiller before a soccer game, I left that soccer game and I remember driving home with my husband and my friend, and I was like, you guys don't get pounding in your head when you run. And they were just like, what? No. And I never associated the pounding in my head with the headache. I just thought that was normal. I didn't associate it like it would be like a throbbing, almost like my heart was pounding in my head. So I started to identify some of the early symptoms. And I had listened to, I don't know if it was a podcast or some sort of audio of someone describing themselves healing themselves from cancer by just shifting, making small shifts. So that gave me the idea to try this with my headaches. So what I would do was I knew every time I exercised, every time I played soccer, as an example, And soccer was really my experiment because I was doing it weekly for like the duration of the summer, so a few months. So every time I would play soccer, I would get a headache. So that was my belief attached to it of like, if I play soccer, I will get a headache. I knew I couldn't shift my belief from, okay, I'm going to play soccer and not get a headache. Like that was too much of an extreme. But I knew sometimes I could play soccer on a Friday night and sometimes I would still have the headache on Saturday and sometimes I wouldn't. So my first goal became my headache is only going to last. I believe that my headache's only going to last tonight and I'll wake up headache free tomorrow. So I started to play with that. And then it just shifted. I didn't believe it was possible necessarily for me in that moment to play a soccer game and not get a headache. But I was like, okay, I know it's possible for other people. And so there's the potential that it's possible for me. So I just started shifting things incrementally. And I started setting these little goals. And now that I knew that like the throbbing was an early sign, as soon as I felt that, I would sub off. And that was actually probably one of my biggest challenges because I'm a super competitive person, super driven. And even though this was recreational soccer, I didn't want to sub off, especially when we didn't have subs. So then me sitting off would be like basically putting our team a man down. But I was like, I'm determined to do this. So it was just through incremental shifts. And it took me about 4.5 months through the duration of a soccer season. And finally, I could play a 90-minute game without getting a headache. But it was just through those small micro shifts. And that lasted into the next season. And then I started noticing the identity I had wrapped around being in pain. So what I noticed then, I wasn't getting headaches, but I was hurting myself more. I was spraining my ankle. I was twisting my knee. I was colliding with people. I was getting more bruises. This is interesting because the story in my head, there was still this attachment, this part of my identity identified so much related to exercise of being in pain that, my being, I guess, just created other ways for me to be in pain. So then I got to start to unravel some of that attachment to my identity and pain.
Wow. You're an attachment to pain. Interesting. I did not see the conversation going that way. Okay. But I love how you mentioned the incremental shifts. I think that's huge. I think that's the biggest way to change anything. I even have a weight loss journey and I talk about it a lot. I had a personal trainer tell me I wasn't going to see success if I didn't change my diet or nutrition. And I didn't do anything nutrition wise for about 3 months because I knew I can't do it all. So even you mentioned you weren't going to believe that you couldn't have a headache at all. So it's like I didn't have the belief in myself initially that I could change all of this. Well, could I have? Maybe. But it's like if you know deep down, like you don't think you're going to be able to do it, starting with something that you think is so powerful. But now you mentioned identifying with the pain.
Yeah.
How did you realize you were identifying with the
Well, because I noticed, so, things like, I'm trying to remember, this was a while ago, but as I was playing soccer, the script, the dialogue going in my head was other people don't know what you're going through. Just keep going. People don't understand you. Or almost like if I screwed up, it was the pain's fault. I had sort of like this thing to blame. Or if I couldn't push myself harder, I had this thing to blame. So, the pain was serving a purpose, a convoluted, effed up purpose, but it was serving a purpose. And when the pain in my head disappeared, that script was still there. And I was like, that's really interesting because I hadn't really noticed these thoughts because, they were just so prevalent and so a part of my being and my daily activity that like it was constant in my mind. But when the pain wasn't there and I was still having these thoughts, I'm like, why am I having these thoughts? There's actually no pain here. And then I started to notice when like I would sprain my ankle or twist my knee or have a collision and all those things. And I was like, oh, there's some additional work that I have to do because otherwise the pain is clearly wanting to come back because it's part of my identity. I'm finding strength in identifying with this pain because it is pushing me in a way, it is giving me an excuse in a way, it is almost differentiating me from other people. Like, I'm special, people don't know what I'm going through, even though I wouldn't necessarily always say that out loud.
How did you start to notice this internal dialogue?
Yeah, I think it was just because it surprised me that it was there. So I was like, great, I'm not in pain, but the dialogue was still there and it was confusing to me. So when the pain was there, I didn't notice the dialogue because it made sense to me. But as soon as the pain was gone, I'm like, this is out of place. There's no reason for me to be having these thoughts. So I could start to see them more clearly.
So then you started to notice the dialogue. What was your first step once you noticed this dialogue?
You know what? I don't remember. I honestly don't remember. I would guess that I just started to peel back the layers. Is it true? Can I let it go? Is this serving me? But I truthfully don't remember the step-by-steps after getting rid of the pain. I remember it being part of my identity. And I can see now, I can see it in other people. Like, I'm really close to my dad who's in a lot of pain. And I'm like, I can see how this is very much a part of his identity, because I think with chronic pain, what I understand about it now is that it is very much, it's like your brain is signaling to your body to be in pain. And if it's lasting, it is serving you in some way. I feel like these lasting patterns, no matter what they are, and even if they don't make sense, like, nobody wants to be in pain, but it becomes part of their identity and it is serving them in some way. And I could see that this had been serving me in some way, and I didn't want it to serve me. I didn't want that to be part of my identity.
No, that it's interesting you say it's serving them in some way, because I've noticed that in a few different people that I know that have chronic pain as well. And it's like they are almost embodying this identity of a sick person. Like, I know people, and it could go either way. Like, I understand the benefits of it, but I know people in different types of chronic pain, whether it's cancer, whether it's fibromyalgia, and there was these Facebook support groups. And I get you wanting to connect with people going through it, but it's almost at the same time, you're identifying with it more because you're in the community with people who have it. You're talking about it more, so you're embodying it.
Yeah, and you're developing community and friendship around it. And, who are you without your pain? I feel like that's a really profound question to ask. Like, who are you if you're not limited? Who are you if you're not having this excuse to hold you back? There's so many different layers to this. But yeah, who are you without your pain?
No, it's so true. Like, that's even one of the reasons I ask, like, my first question, like, who you are at the core, because so many people will be like, oh, I do this for a job. This is my business. This is my whatever. Or even people with chronic pain. And it's like not negating the pain or whatever you're going through. Because, like, I've never had cancer. I've never had a lot of these different chronic illnesses. So I can't speak from experience. But it's like you're identifying as this, but, like, who are you as a person? Like, outside of what you go to do and clock in as, or outside of this thing that hurts you or causes you pain, because, like, okay, maybe you can't heal some things. I get it.
Yeah, I love that.
Do you have any tips for people to, like, step away from identifying with a chronic illness or with pain they're struggling with?
Well, I think there's a couple of things that worked for me, which I've shared. That's the shifting your mindset subtly, and it's asking, who am I without this pain? There's been another book, or a book I read, not related to exercise headaches. That wasn't what I was trying to deal with at the time, but there's a book called The Way Out, and I forget the author, and it talks about chronic pain and how what happens in your body is when you have the initial injury, your body sends a signal to your brain that tells it's in pain. What happens at some point down the road is that your brain tells your body that it's in pain. So the signals get reversed. And so when you can start to shift your mindset around the pain, the physical part of your body has healed after a certain amount of time. The physical body has healed. And in that book, they say it doesn't matter what it is. Obviously, an ongoing disease is different than an injury from like a car accident or something like, one-time event. But it's basically like when you can shift your mindset, and usually it's related to fear. So I'll give you an example. I was having knee pain for a while, and it would hurt when I walked downstairs. And because of this book, I started noticing the moments of fear that just like passed into me right as I was approaching stairs to go down. And all I had to do was just say to my body, like, you are safe. You are safe. Your knee works. You are safe. And I started just sort of programming my brain that way. You are safe. I healed wrist pain this way. Just, you are safe. You are strong. You are safe. And it's just shifting our thought patterns. So that book was also a game changer for me.
Wow. Okay. The way out. Love that. And I like how you mentioned the you are safe, like that's something not in terms of chronic pain, but in terms of like different situations, like stressful situations that I would get myself in, and reminding myself like physically you're safe. You will figure out how to do XYZ. Physically right now you're safe and you can do this, whatever this is.
Yeah, I feel like the safety piece is something I'm becoming more and more aware of, just how it underpins so much of our beliefs and fears. Like even something like me speaking my mind or sharing something that might be a little bit uncomfortable for someone or upsetting for some, potentially upsetting. And, it's how safe do I feel to share my opinion with this person? So I feel like safety, there's something there that I had never used that word before up until pretty recently, like in the last few months. And even when I think about, getting into a relationship, like I'm single right now, I'm like, I want someone who feels safe, which was never in my vocabulary, a few years ago. It's possible I was searching for that without knowing, but now I'm just like, safety just feels like such a big thing in so many areas because there's fear in all areas.
What would you say safety means to you?
Obviously, I think there's the physical safety that so much of us think about, but the emotional safety. Does someone have space for my feelings? Will they listen to me? Will they accept what I'm saying? Do I believe I am safe to express myself or am I safe no matter what the consequences are? I've made a lot of big life changes and some of them are very scary, and I've had a lot of fear to move through. But underneath that, I believe I will be safe regardless of the outcome. So I feel like there's so many I think it hits on all of the mental, spiritual, physical aspects of ourselves.
Yeah. No, it's so true. It really does. I like how you mentioned, though, even about like safety in terms of, do I feel safe to express myself to you? Like, am I safe to share my opinion? Like there's so many layers to it,
Yeah, and you might be totally comfortable expressing your opinion with one person, but another person, it could be totally different. Or one-on-one, you might be fine versus a group setting versus public speaking.
No, it's true. But I think that shows, to me anyway, I think that shows you a lot about like certain people in your life, like if you only feel so safe to talk to a certain person about certain things, like why is that? Like if you have certain friends that you can't talk to about everything, like why is that? And like getting curious to like understand that. And it's helped me understand myself and life so much more, like paying attention to that instead of just being like, oh, I'm just not comfortable with them. But it's like,
Yeah, because oftentimes, like, it may be that person's reaction, but what is so bad if they react? What is so bad if they are no longer your friend or no longer want to speak to you? Like, there's so many layers to this. Like, will you be okay if all of that happens? The answer is always yes. Yes, you will be okay.
So I want to transition a tad. So we were chatting about your headaches and soccer and gymnastics. And so I'm curious, you did sports in high school and post high school. Did you go to college? What was post high school like for?
I went to university. I did a degree in urban planning. I did no sports on any teams. I would work out and, stay active, but yeah, no further sports. But yeah, I did a degree in urban planning, and then I went to work in that field right away out of school.
And now what's urban planning? Like what is?
Oh, I mean, there's so many different areas you could go into, but in general, it's like cities, planning neighborhoods, that sort of thing.
Okay. And now did you know that this is what you wanted to?
No, how I went into that was I really wanted to do architecture, and I didn't have some of the maths and sciences that I needed to go into architecture. But I knew if I did an undergraduate degree in planning that I could do a master's in architecture, or I could switch partway through. So I went into planning thinking using it as a stepping stone to get into architecture. And then I actually really enjoyed planning when I got into it, and I continued with that. By my 4th year, though, I was like, no, I know this is not the career I want to do. Like, I knew it wasn't for me, but I had no idea what else I wanted to do. And I had just spent, a tiny bit of money on a university degree. So I was like, okay, I'll go get a job in this field. And I got a job. It wasn't doing traditional urban planning. So I actually worked for a school board in the planning department. So there was a lot of, I still did, some of the typical stuff in terms of working with developers and municipalities to locate new schools and all of that stuff. But then there was a lot of other interesting things. So it kept me occupied for 13 years, but I knew it wasn't what I wanted to do for forever, but I just didn't know what to do. And it was interesting enough that I got promoted and got promoted, worked my way up. And like I said, from a young age, I was just like goal, success, achieve. So I just didn't think anything of it until I sort of hit the top around age 30. And I was like, this cannot be the rest of my life. And things started to unravel from there.
Okay. Now you spent 13 years there when you didn't want to be there.
Like I said, it had enough variety to keep me interested. I was good at it. I started to become well respected in that field, and I started to work my way up. And so I knew it wasn't what I wanted to do long term. I didn't know what else, but also my conditioning was so strong. Like, I was conditioned from a young age by my parents, go to university, get a good job, get a good government job with a good pension, and you'll be set for life. So I was very much just on that trail. And sort of when I hit that 30 mark, when I hit that, management position, and I was as high as I could go in that organization. And I was like, okay, I'm 30. People normally retire at like 65. And I was like, is this really the rest of my life? And then that was when I started to realize that, oh, this was my dad's dream. This was not my dream. And I still didn't know what to do. So that was about maybe 6 or 7 years into my career. I stayed another 6 or 7 years then. Because I didn't know what to do. And then the salary was so good. And then I started having a family. And my husband at the time, he went back to school. So I was I won't say sole provider because he was still working part-time, but it was just, I didn't know what I wanted to do anyways. And it was supporting our family. And it was good enough. It was comfortable you just sort of, you get comfortable a bit, even though it's not perfect. There wasn't enough of a pain to force me out, or enough of an incentive to force me out until there was.
What happened to get you to leave?
Yeah, it was really having kids. That changed a lot for me here in Canada, at that time, we got 1 year mat leave. I know you can take 18 months now. So I was at home with my first baby for a year. And I thought that would drive me nuts. Turns out I loved it. And I went back to work after she turned a year, but I had started a blog. And I was like, I don't know where this is leading, but I feel it was the first time I'd really had like some creative inspiration. And I was just like, I'll just do this because it feels fun to me. Had no idea where it would lead, if it would lead to anything. It just felt fun to me. Then I had my son and went on another 1 year maternity leave. And at that time, I was still doing my blog and I was talking about parenting because that was the world I was living. I stumbled upon something called positive discipline at the time, and I really liked their techniques or their tools and their approach. And I was applying it with my kids. I was talking about what I was doing, and I was just like, oh, maybe I'll just, get certified in this because it'll just add some credibility. I really wasn't thinking anything of it. I was just like, oh, this is what I like to talk about. I'll just go get a certification. So as part of that, I had to teach a course. So I had like a wine and cheese night with my mom friends. I taught my first parenting course and they're like, this was so good, Lindsay, you should do this. And I was like, I wonder if I could do this. It was a lot of fun for me. I don't even know how to do this. I don't know how to teach parenting classes. So I contacted someone who owned a yoga studio and I was like, can I just take you out for coffee and pick your brain? Because I'm not an entrepreneur. I don't know like all this. And she ran a very specialized yoga studio that had like mom and baby classes. She's like, why don't you just teach one at my place? We'll just do like a workshop on a Saturday. And I was like, okay. And there was 27 people that signed up for my very first parenting class. And I taught it and I was scared out of my mind. And it's sort of that parenting business I just started doing very part-time. Started doing some one-on-one coaching. I taught a couple workshops a year because I was still working full-time. I still had small kids. I was like, I don't have much time here to go full in on this. And I just started doing it because it felt fun to me. And then as that was feeling more fun, the other thing that was happening was my kids were in daycare. My daughter went to school. So my son was still young then. And I felt like I never saw my kids. And I knew because of my parenting, certification and learning and all that, I'm like, the one key strategy was quality time with your kids. And I'm like, I can see all these behavior issues happening in my kids. And I know it's because of this like sprint and this hustle that we're living in. And yet this is sort of the norm. So I just started to feel like really miserable. I'm like, I have all the boxes checked. I have the house. I have the 2 kids. I'm married. I have the successful career. I'm making the 6 figures. Like I have all the things. I'm like, my quality of life is so low. Like this cannot be, what quote unquote success is. And so I made a plan to quit my job and do my parenting business full time. We socked away some money and that took some time to convince my husband because he was like, you make way more than I do. And so the idea of losing my salary was quite overwhelming for him. But fortunately, we had just had 2 maternity leaves where I wasn't working full time. I was earning unemployment. And I'm like, we really just have to save like our expenses. We don't have to replace my income. We just have to cover our expenses. So we decided to try it for a year. We saved enough for basically to cover us for a year and then we'd reassess. So it wasn't a permanent decision. And I never went back. My parenting business did not go as planned because life just, COVID happened and a lot of things happened that I was suddenly homeschooling my kids. So I went from never seeing my kids and just wanting more quality time with them to having them full time. And yeah, I can stop there. Eventually, I just put my business on hold and focused on raising my kids, homeschooling my kids. And then my marriage fell apart and then I had to figure things out again.
You mentioned when you were working the job, you realized you got the corporate job, you got the government job with the pension, that you were living your dad's dream and not yours.
Mhm.
How did you uncover that?
Oh my goodness. I think because I got to that goal that my dad had set for me and I was miserable. Now, I didn't realize my dad had set that for me. I very much thought that was my own. And I think there's something to be said when you reach your goal. I do think there's like a yay and then a lull after. Like, I do feel like we need to be working towards something, have some sort of purpose. So there was that piece of it that felt really like heavy and, oh my God, is this the rest of my life? And then I started to just peel back what made me unhappy. And I think it was only in hindsight that I was able to look back and go, oh, that was my dad's goal. That was my conditioning. Because it took a lot of unconditioning to be able to walk away from something like that. So I think it was just through that process of, redefining success, because success for me was always an income, like an income value. And for me to walk into the parenting business where I was not making that income, I mean, I had hoped to, but I would be backtracking. I would be walking away from a stable job with the benefits and the pension and all of that stuff, going to basically, I'll say, you're betting on yourself. You are responsible for your success when you are an entrepreneur, nobody else. Like when you work for the government, I got a raise every year for cost of living, even if I wasn't working my way up. And I didn't have to, there was no merit-based pay in where I was working. I think it was through that process, that redefining process, that I was able to look back and go, oh, this was never mine to begin with. I can just let it go.
You can just let it go. And, I really like that you mentioned your plan to quit the job. It wasn't a permanent thing. Give it 1 year. Like so many people, I think, get caught up or stuck with taking any sort of risk, whether it's pursuing their dream, like starting their own business, because they think, if I do this, then that's the thing. But it doesn't mean you can't get another job. 9 to 5s are not going anywhere. Like even if you start your business and then you're like, that didn't work, or even if you just don't like it, like you don't like being, you're not stuck just because you make one decision.
Yeah, no decision is ever permanent. You can shift and pivot. You will shift and pivot regardless. But yeah, oftentimes these big decisions, we get overwhelmed because they feel permanent. And, in this case, quitting my job, there's a TED Talk by Tim Ferriss called Fear Setting that really helped. It's basically like you take your big problem and you write out all of your what if scenarios, your worst case scenarios, like pre and post, and then everything you can do to mitigate it pre and post. And it's an intellectual exercise, but basically when you go through that process, you realize that there might be only like some small details that you really need to work out. Fear likes to stay vague. And when you can break it down and be specific, a lot of that fear dissipates, because then you're like, okay, there's only maybe these 2 problems or these 2 fears that I need to work through. And everything else is manageable. You can mitigate before and after. It really kills off the fear, takes the steam out of the fear, and makes that overwhelming task seem very manageable and doable. And if it goes sideways, you can easily recover from it. You can see that when you write all of that down.
Wow, that's cool. I've never seen that. Okay. And the big problem, and then what could go wrong pre and post. I like that.
Yeah. And then basically, what is the cost of deferring the decision or staying stuck? Not necessarily the monetary cost, but like, what are you giving up by not pursuing this? Which is also another really helpful thing, because I think for me, the idea of not seeing my kids, staying stuck in that job and not seeing my kids and just sprinting through life, I didn't want that to be my life a year from there or 5 years from now. Like that was, when I thought about that, I was like, there's fear in that. Like there's a lot of fear in leaving, but there's fear in like not staying stuck in the thing that you don't want.
Wow, that's true. I like how you mentioned, like, what is it going to cost you? Not even necessarily financially, but like by choosing or making the decision for whatever it is, you're choosing to say no to something else. Like your yes to whatever, like anything in general. Like your yes to something is a no to something else. You know, whether that's a job, whether it's a trip, whether it's something you're pursuing, like you're toning down something else, whether you realize that you're toning it down or not, like there's something you're toning down, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
So in terms of the parenting classes, you started doing parenting classes, and how soon was that before COVID?
So the parenting classes I started when my son was young at 1, and COVID happened, he was 3. So I had already been teaching 2 years or just like maybe 2.5 years. And I quit my job. My last day was March 2nd, 2020. So it was literally like 2 weeks before the pandemic hit. And that first year, that 2020 year, I went full steam ahead on parenting. Like I was doing online stuff. I wrote a book, published a book. So I was doing that with my kids home, and that was fine. It wasn't until 2021 when things started crumbling in my business. And I can look back now and understand what happened. And I really believe it was just like the universe saying, now is not the time for your business. Now is the time to focus on your family. And it was like all these things just weren't working out. And then my dad was in the hospital. And then when he came out, my mom broke her arm, so she couldn't care for him. And then they were in lockdown, so I had the kids home. Like it was just like one thing after another on the personal level. And then things on the business side just started like being clunky, and I'd have like really weird technical issues, and just like things were not happening. My daughter's stress became so much at school that it was like we had to get her out of there. And so all of a sudden I was like, okay, I'm homeschooling. And now for real this time, because before when COVID hit, I was just like, everyone's going to be behind. We don't have to worry about school too much. Now I'm like, okay, now their education is my responsibility. I actually need to take that seriously. I just think it was the universe saying, now is the time for your family. And I can understand that now because the life I built for my kids is now informing how I'm living and how I'm rebuilding work back into my life. So that was, it was important for that work to die, even though I felt like a failure. And there were so many pieces, there were so many layers to that as well, because, I had quit the job and essentially, I'll say failed for the first time in my life. Not that's true or anything, but at something major, I was just like, I felt like I should have been able to make it successful, and I could have made it successful, but it just wasn't meant to be. And I do believe that there was some spiritual aspects to that.
Okay. Now, you mentioned shortly after this, your marriage started unraveling. How approximately, in terms of timing of you quitting the job, the parenting classes, like when did that start?
So I think it started happening around the same time I was deciding to quit my job, but we were still together for another few years. And it wasn't until 2 or 3 years later that we actually separated. So it was just, it dissolved, I'll say slowly and painfully. But because of all of the counseling that we did, and because we had a desire to try with our relationship, we worked through a lot of our stuff. And I like to say that, that therapy didn't save our marriage, but it saved our relationship. And we have a really good relationship with each other now. And we are able to walk away very amicably, and which was necessary for this life that I'm now leading, which is like traveling and, splitting my time between Canada and Bali with my kids. When you can look back a few years later, you're like, oh, that's why that happened, because it was, I was not able to live to my fullest expression in that marriage. I was censoring myself. I was, even with my business, I felt like if I was successful in that parenting business, it would have destroyed my marriage, because I would have wanted to just expand and rise and do all these things. And I would have wanted him to change along with me. I was going through such a growth, and he wasn't changing with me. So I was like, if I had this it was not a conscious belief at first. It was underlying of like, if I'm successful, my marriage will end. Not realizing that if that was the case, my marriage was already doomed.
You said, I like how you mentioned that it didn't save your marriage, but it saved your relationship, and I think that's really powerful. As we've talked before, like I've been a divorce paralegal for 4 years, and seeing some parents and how their relationship affects the kids and likely will affect the kids for a long time. I think that's really great that you were able to do that, because it can affect them a lot. And I'm sure you understand that, having gone through divorce and having kids.
Yeah, and I mean, that weighed heavily on us for a while, and there were months near the end where we're just like, we're gonna stay together for the kids, and we'll just figure out the other pieces. This is gonna be more of like a business relationship or a raising kids relationship, and we tried that for a little bit. It didn't work for us, but we were able to have these really honest conversations, and I remember sitting down with him, and it was really like the question that made us decide to end it. And it was like, would we want this relationship for our kids? And both of us were just like, no, we would not want this for our kids. So then it became about how can we create a relationship that we would be happy for our kids to model. And for us, we couldn't do that in marriage. We had to separate in order to do that, because we had to, when we were married, we were attached to an outcome and changing the other person. And when we were separated, we were no longer attached to that outcome.
That makes a lot of sense. I think it's great, though, that you were able to see that and take the time to think what type of relationship you would want for your kids. I think a lot of people don't do that. They get so caught up in their partner and themselves that they aren't able to recognize that other people are involved in this, you know?
Yeah, and I think for us, we still liked each other. So we didn't wish each other ill or anything like that. I remember when after we decided to separate, and I was really wanting to leave Canada, and at the time I thought I wanted to live in Costa Rica. But I wanted to figure out a different country to live in. And I remember having a conversation with him, and I was like, this is what I'm feeling. And from my perspective, I was feeling horrible about that, because I'm like, I don't want to take you away from the kids. I believe my kids need to have their dad in their life. And I'm like, this is what I'm dealing with. Like, I really want to leave. And I also was feeling terrible that I was, quote unquote, taking the kids away from him. And from his perspective, he was like, yeah, I don't want them to leave, but I also want to support you in what you want to do. And so even at post separation, we're having these types of conversations where we really want what's best for each other and really what's best for our family. Even though we're not living under the same roof, we still are raising these kids together, and we're still a family unit in some respects. And that for us has been really important to maintain. Now, we have not introduced other partners. We're not that far into this. We're only a couple of years post separation. But, we've had the conversation. He's like, what if your future partner doesn't see it this way? I'm like, well, that's going to be a deal breaker for me, because maintaining this family dynamic for the kids is at the forefront of what needs to happen. I'm not going to sacrifice their dad for, a future partner of mine. I'm going to attract a partner that's going to be on board with what's in the best interest of our kids. And I would hope that if he has kids, I'm also doing that for him and his kids.
Now, you mentioned Bali, spending part of your time in Bali. Do you live in Bali half the time and Canada half the time?
So this is very much a work in progress. How long have I spent in Bali? I've spent 10 months in Bali over the last year and a half. Yeah. So it started off just my intuition pulling me there post-separation. And I went there without my kids to heal. And my intuition told me to go there and meet people to help me figure out my life. So I did. And then I came back, still not knowing where I wanted to live. And a few months later, my intuition was like, go back to Bali, take your kids. So the plan was to take them for 6 months. And also my intuition was like, go for 2 months to figure things out, learn how to drive a motorbike, figure out schools, where you want to live, all the things. So I went for those additional 2 months, came home for a month for Christmas, and then my kids and I spent 6 months in Bali earlier this year. And we're going to go back again in January, this time for 3 months, because their dad doesn't want to be away from them for 6 months, which I agree. I understand. The 6 months was chosen because it fit with the school year, but it was pretty full on. Single parenting in a foreign country with 2 kids, that was pretty full on. I loved it, but I'm okay to do less this time. Like I said, I have no desire to keep my kids away from their dad. The 6 months was based on schooling. This year, we're going to try it where they're in the public school system here in Canada. We'll take a 3-month break from that, and then they'll go back in for the last 2.5 months of the school year. It's very much a free-flowing work in progress. The amicable relationship has been super key because I wouldn't be able to do this if we had a really rigid parenting agreement. There would be no way I could live this life.
No, that's true. That's amazing, though, that you guys are able to have that amicable type of relationship, I think that's really going to have a lasting effect on the kids, because they see it, and you can put on a face only so well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's been really interesting because, for those 6 months in Bali, I was actually really afraid to ask my ex-husband why he agreed. I was just like, I'm just going to take his yes and book the tickets and just not think about it. And it was interesting because when the kids got back into the school system here this year, my daughter's teacher asked for us to write a letter about her. So she's like, parents know the kids best. Tell me about your daughter. And he actually wanted to write it, which was really shocking to both of us. And he actually really said, we have a really different relationship, and the kids are benefiting from all this travel and learning and immersing themselves in different cultures. And he described all the benefits he was seeing to what we were doing. And something I had been afraid to ask him because I didn't want him to think about it too. He was actually seeing value for the kids in the travel piece, in the being educated in a different way, in being immersed in different cultures. And it was really helpful to know that, I'm not we are, I'm instigating all this, but he's not like a passive player in this. He can say no at any time. And he's oftentimes, I'll be asked oh, is he okay with this? I'm like, yeah, if he wasn't okay with it, I wouldn't be doing this. How he sees how this is benefiting the kids, even though it's painful for him to be away from the kids.
Yeah. No, but it's also great that you're making compromises as well. Even like you said, January you're going back, but now you're doing 3 months.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's benefits for them being in Bali for 6 months. I think there's benefits for us doing a shorter trip. And yeah, we are both trying to be flexible and make this work. And you know what? Even for me in Canada, I haven't had a home here in Canada for 2 years, which means that we have a very different parenting arrangement even when we're in Canada. So the fact that I've been able to, I'll say, not settle down anywhere, and we just have this free flowing, we don't even have a written parenting plan anymore because it changes every few months. And that works for us because we're able to talk to each other and really keep what's in the best interest of our kids in mind.
Is there anything you'd say that helped the two of you have such an amicable relationship?
You know what? If I think back to the counseling piece, we did something called imago dialogue. And it's basically where one person talks and the other person's job is simply to mirror and not add their filters, but just, I think that helped change the dynamics of how we were having conversations, because before it would be like, something was on my mind. I had to get it off my chest. And then he felt attacked and he retreated. And we were just in this pattern of, and I think a lot of couples share that dynamic where it's like one person's like attack and the other person's like, oh, like hiding and retreating and trying to deflect everything. And what the Imago dialogue did was it forced us to slow down the conversation. It forced us not to argue because we just had to mirror, and then we would take turns and do it the other way. When we did it with a counselor, she was facilitating the dialogue, but we were talking to each other. We weren't telling the counselor on us and asking for advice. We were talking to each other. Through that process, we learned to talk to each other in a different way. We learned to use slightly different language with each other. And because we were able to slow down the conversation, we were able to hear the different nuances that had been missed before because we were just stuck in our patterns. So I think that was a really helpful process for us to go through to really understand each other. And then when it came down, because we could have really hard conversations in that space because it wasn't a back and forth, it was literally share, mirror. The one person might spend like half an hour sharing because it was like a couple sentences so the other person could mirror back. It was so slow and so tedious and so painful at times. But we got to know each other so much better through that process because we weren't back and forth and trying to win and trying to like make our point. So yeah, Imago dialogue.
I've never heard of that. I want to transition a little bit into the podcast and what made you decide to start the podcast.
Yeah. So my Breaking Free with Lindsay podcast, I started about a year ago, and I had done a podcast as part of my parenting business. And a couple things happened with that podcast. I realized, so that podcast, I was not doing interviews, and I was finding it really hard to come up with ideas, to talk to myself. And now when I understand my human design, I'm a generator. I need people and ideas to bounce things off of. I can understand that. So I enjoyed the podcasting. So from when I was thinking about running my parenting business, I'm like, I want people to be able to get to know me and my personality. And I feel like podcasts really help with that. The other thing when I was doing my parenting business is I was going on other people's podcasts, especially after I wrote a book and I was promoting the book and all of that stuff. I was going on a lot of podcasts and I loved it. Like I loved having conversations with people. And when it came to my new business, now I went into affiliate marketing. And so I don't have a coaching practice. I don't have my own business. I feel like it's evolving into something. But I was like, I wanted to do something again to connect with people. And part of the way I was trained in the affiliate marketing business was through personal branding and just basically being yourself online. Show up, talk about what you want to talk about. And I found I had a lot to say on this topic of breaking free and fear and intuition and limiting beliefs. And that was what I found myself talking about over and over again. And I was like, I really miss podcasting. I loved being on podcasts. And I was like, if I could interview people, like I just love having conversations with people. So I was like, I'll just, I'll start a podcast because I love this topic. And I'm just going to do it in a way that's fun for me. So that's all this podcast has been so far, is just a really fun way for me to pick apart people's brains and what they think and really help the listeners understand that there's different ways of living and it's okay to live off script. And here's how, different guests have done it. And here's the thought processes. Here's the fears they work through. Here's, the different situations. And I've had like people talk about mindset, of health, on parenting, businesses, like just such a wide range of experiences, but all through the lens of breaking free from their scripts and their belief patterns and really stepping into the life that they want to be living. So Yeah, the Breaking Free with Lindsay podcast has very much been a passion project. I feel it evolving into something else because I could see it being a lot of fun doing coaching again. But I love this. Bali and Canada are like 12-hour difference in time zones. And I'm like, how can I commit? How can I commit to supporting people when I don't even know where I'm going to be in a few months? So, there's some things I'm working on. But yeah, right now I love just sharing the message and helping people understand that there's a different way of living and they get to create their life. And that's really exciting that we're all empowered to create the life that we want.
I love how you started that, though. It was a fun project for you. But that's so cool that you had one before with the parenting one. And did you do any interviews?
No, because I believed I had to position myself as the expert and I didn't know how to keep it on point with parenting while not bringing on other parenting experts. And I was very much in, it's funny because, it was my own business, but I put boxes all around myself. I can look back and it's kind of funny now that, in my own business, I couldn't break free of all those beliefs. But in this affiliate marketing business, which is really promoting other people's products, I get to just be free to do whatever I want, which is pretty incredible. So that journey has shown me a lot. And now if I wanted to go back in that parenting business and do it very differently, but that's not where I was at that time.
Now, when did you start doing affiliate marketing?
So that was about a year ago. And I was looking, my marriage fell apart. I was a stay-at-home mom. I had no income. I knew I didn't want to go back into the 9-to-5 world. My parenting business was sort of limping along, pretty much dead at that point. And I was like, do I resurrect that? And I wasn't feeling super passionate about it. And so I was looking for a way to earn money around the life I wanted to lead. So, when I talked earlier about the business part had to go to the side, whereas then I had to focus on what life did I want with my kids. Then I took that. I'm like, I know the life I want with my kids. Now I just need to fold money back into it, fold an income back into it. And how do I do that? And as I was traveling, I was literally asking every single person I met, every expat I met, how are you earning money? How are you making this work? How are you doing this? And just collecting ideas. And the affiliate marketing thing was a hard no for me at first. I had so many limiting beliefs about what that industry was, what, sales had to be. And I was just like, I have zero desire to do anything. I want to do something that lights me up. And it wasn't until 6 months after that I was like, oh, this now feels right because I can do it in a way that empowers other people. I can do it in a way that feels so aligned and so uplifting. And sales is literally just having conversations with people to see what they want. And if I have what they want, and it's no more than that.
And now how'd you shift to start seeing the fun side of that?
Oh my God, I was doing so much healing work at the time. So when I went to Bali, that was like the meet people to help you figure out your life. And I started doing massive amounts of healing work, internal work. I actually had developed a fear of work, which I was able to unravel during that first 2 months in Bali that I didn't really realize was there, but it was really, I had been successful in my career and earned a decent income. And I hated what it took to earn that income. And so I had a lot of fear about working again, essentially, whether that was for myself or for anyone, because I was like, I don't want to hustle. I don't want to never see my kids. I love this life that we have. I want something that I can do around this life rather than trying to live my life around the work I was doing. So I really started to peel back the layers of work and what it took to be successful. And, did I believe that I was capable of earning, a 6-figure salary or income in working, 10 to 20 hours a week? And there were some things that needed to shift and are probably still shifting in me to allow that to come in, because that was, I was raised, you work X number of hours and you get paid. You're paid for your time. And that's taken a while to unravel. And the affiliate marketing space is really, if you wanted to buy a product from me, I'm not going to sit here and talk to you about the product for, right away. I'm going to say, here's a webinar for you to watch, because that frees up my time. But it also shows you that if you're interested in doing this type of business, that you can free up your time by, using some automation. And so there's these different pieces that I saw. And then the friend that had originally introduced it to me, I just followed her on social media, not with the intent of following her for business, but just because we were friends. And she did it in such a way that I was never once put off. I never once felt sold to. And I could see the life that she was living. I knew the income she was making. And I was like, okay, if this is possible for her, this has to be possible for me too.
Love that. But it took some shifting of the internal beliefs. That makes a lot of sense, because it's a different way of owning income than, one, you were raised, two, you were used to for so many years. And it's just something different. You had to internally start telling yourself you were even worthy of being able to do,
Yeah, the self-worth piece are massive.
That makes so much sense. Thank you so much for speaking with me. Have you heard of a man named Jay Shetty?
Yes.
So he's got a podcast called On Purpose, and he ends it with 2 segments, and I incorporated them into my podcast.
Okay.
First segment is the many sides to us. There's 5 questions, and they need to be answered in 1 word each.
Okay.
What is 1 word someone who was meeting you for the first time would use to describe you as?
Lovely.
What is 1 word that someone who knows you extremely well would use to describe you as?
Authentic.
What is 1 word you'd use to describe yourself?
Courageous.
What is 1 word, if someone didn't like you or agree with your mindset, would use to describe you as?
I was going to say bossy was the first thing that came to my mind. But
Okay.
yeah.
What is 1 word you're embodying right now?
Worth.
Second segment is the final 5, and there's 5 questions, and these can be answered in a sentence. What is the best advice you've heard or received?
Relax into it.
Why is that the best advice?
It was advice I was given when I was about to give birth. And it was basically this idea of the more you fight it, the more it's going to hurt. Just relax into the pain. And I feel like that's so applicable to every area of life. The things that you're fighting and trying to control, you're just making it more painful, and you just need to relax into it.
I like that. What is the worst advice you've heard or received?
Get along to go along.
Why is that the worst?
I think it just implies that I think it's just this people-pleasing mentality of, go along with everybody else and don't put your needs ahead of anyone else. Don't advocate for your needs. And I really feel that. I feel that's so prevalent in our society as Canadians, and I see the damage that it's doing.
What is something that you used to value that you no longer value?
Something I used to value that I no longer value. Oh, attention from men.
I did not expect you to say that. If you could describe what you would want your legacy to be as if someone was reading it, what would you want it to say?
Oh, I think something along the lines of living fully and living courageously. You know what? I really believe in setting an example for my kids and showing them what's possible.
Okay. If you could create 1 law in the world that everyone had to follow, what would it be? And I want to know why.
I don't know how you would enforce this, but it would be honest. Like, be honest. Yeah, I feel like that's self-explanatory, but I think there's so much deception going on in the world and no accountability and a fear of having honest conversations, which I think is really needed right now. Be honest.
Well, thank you so much for speaking with me. I really appreciate it.
This has been a really fun conversation. Thanks so much for having me, Amanda.
Oh my gosh, of course. Can everybody connect with you?
Yeah, Breaking Free with Lindsay on all of the platforms. That's my website. That's my podcast. That's my Instagram. That's my Facebook. So Breaking Free with Lindsay with an A.
Awesome. And I will link that in the show notes. Any final words of wisdom, anything else you want to share with the listeners before we fully close out?
Yeah, just you will never regret investing in yourself and in your dreams, and go for it. You're worthy of going after your dreams.
Love that. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Of course. And thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of Manders Mindset. In case no one told you today, I'm proud of you. I'm rooting for you. And you got this. As always, if you enjoyed the show, I would really appreciate it if you would leave me a 5-star rating, leave a review, and share it with anyone you think would benefit from this. And don't forget, you are only one mindset shift away from shifting your life. Thanks, guys. Until next time.